Well, we will give everybody time to get in, but let's get things started. It is 11:01. I want to be respectful of everybody's time, both on our panel and in the audience. So good morning, everyone. My name is Kyle Sullender. Thank you so much for being here this morning. I am the Director of Economic Policy Research at the New Jersey Business and Industry Association, one of the member organizations of the New Jersey Business Immigration Coalition. I have the privilege of welcoming you today and providing a short introduction to both our program and some of our speakers. A little bit about us, why we're here this morning. NJBIA and the coalition have joined together to sponsor the Garden State Immigration Policy Institute. The Institute's goal is to educate the public on vital public policy questions in the area of immigration. And we do this by marshaling the best research and the best expertise in specific policy areas to the best of our ability. The topic for today's program may seem at first a bit peripheral to overall immigration policy, but it's our hope that by the end of this discussion, you'll have gained a greater appreciation for the potential of international students and scholars to supercharge the American economy. Before we go any further, I'd be remiss if I did not give a special shout out to both of our sponsors for this morning's programs, the law firm of Genova Burns and CGI, one of the largest IT and business consulting services in the world. Without the support of our sponsors, we simply would not have the capacity to mount programs of this type and caliber. So again, a special thank you to both of our sponsors, Genova Burns and CGI. Before I introduce our keynote speaker, I would like to tell you a little bit about what to expect from this morning's program. After our opening presentation, you will hear from a panel of representatives from 5 New Jersey colleges and universities who will share their experiences in working with the international student population. The panel will focus on policy and administrative reforms that will enable the U.S. to maintain its global leadership position in attracting international talent. And that will be followed by a brief question and answer session. It is at this point that I will direct you to the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. I want to note that that is separate from the chat dialogue button, so make sure you're putting your questions in the Q&A tab and not the general chat. And of course, I always like to remind participants, you do not have to wait for the question and answer session to begin placing your questions in that space. If you are anything like me, by the time you go from having your question to the time the Q&A session begins, you will have had 17 other thoughts and questions, and you will lose the thread on that first one. So as you have questions during our panel, please feel free to drop those in the Q&A box so that our moderator can divide them up to our panelists as we get to the Q&A. Finally, our last speaker for the morning, the director of the President's Alliance on Higher Education and Immigration, will join us to tell you about what her organization of over 500 colleges and universities is doing to advance a reform agenda in this area. With that, let me say it is a great privilege for me to now introduce Mr. Stuart Anderson, our keynote speaker for today's program. Stuart is a person with great expertise in the topic under discussion today. He currently serves as Executive Director of the National Foundation for American Policy, an Arlington-based nonpartisan public policy research organization which focuses on trade, immigration, and related issues. Not only does the foundation, under his leadership, produce cutting-edge research in the immigration arena, but he also commands a massive audience as senior contributor to Forbes magazine on immigration-related issues. Before coming to the foundation, Stuart spent 4 years working on Capitol Hill for the Senate Immigration Subcommittee. And before that, he served as counselor to the Commissioner of Immigration and Naturalization Service. And before that, he was director of Trade and Immigration at the Cato Institute. And as if that were not already impressive enough, Stuart does have some ties to New Jersey on a personal level, having earned his bachelor's degree in political science at Drew University, but of course, we will not say when. Stuart, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your insights and expertise with us and our audience. With that, it is my pleasure to turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Kyle, and thank you to the coalition for inviting me to speak. When we think about international students, if you look at years ago, people primarily thought about international students as individuals who came to America and then returned to their home country. If you Google international students as foreign leaders, you'll see there's an old State Department page that actually lists over 12 pages worth of international students who returned to their home countries and became foreign leaders. But as globalization increased, you saw increasing interest among companies, and then later governments picked this up, that international students were an outstanding source of talent for whatever country they ended up making their careers. And you can see that today when you go on college campuses as companies, as recruiters, you'll find that over 70% of the full-time graduate students in computer information sciences and electrical engineering, to name two subjects, are international students. So that's what the market and the labor market is when companies try to recruit. But to stay in the United States, typically an international student is going to, at some point, need an H-1B visa. And that's one reason why H-1B visas are so important. They tend to be the only practical way for a foreign national, including an international student, to remain in the United States long term. Now, there was recently a lottery held because the H-1B annual limit is actually only 85,000 for companies. And what you found over the past 4 lotteries is that for FY 2021, there were about 46% of the eligible registrations were selected. That dropped down to 43% the following year, and then down to 27% for 2023. And then the most recent year, it was 14.6%. Now, there was some controversy over this past year because USCIS found a lot of people had multiple registrations, that some companies have gotten together, mostly companies that people really hadn't heard of. And USCIS is investigating that. And we expect in the future that the lottery might change. So it'd be focused more on individuals, maybe with their passport numbers, to make sure that extra numbers wouldn't get used or necessitate a second lottery. That would increase companies' ability to get more of the people that they're registering for. But the problem isn't really just these multiple registrations. The real problem is that the cap is just too low. That our think tank analyzed the lottery results and found that there was actually a 66% increase since 2022 in individuals with only one company sponsoring them or trying to sponsor them for an H-1B. And that even if you excluded all of the individuals with more than one offer in the H-1B registration lottery, you still would have had over 75% of the H-1B registrations would have been rejected. So clearly there's the problem is that the H-1B limit is too low. Another problem is employment-based green cards. The 140,000 limit for that category is also too low. And as a result, when you combine it with the per country limit, you'll find that people from India are sometimes waiting potentially decades to have the chance to get a green card in the United States. And in fact, the Congressional Research Service says by 2030, you're looking at a backlog of potentially 2 million people in the employment-based backlog because of the low limit and the demand for the labor and the talent. Now, this connects related to international students on why international students have been choosing, to a great degree, Canada over the United States, at least in percentage terms in recent years. For example, if you look in Canada, you can get their equivalent of an H-1B often within 2 weeks, and there's no annual limit on high skill temporary visas in Canada. And if an international student has some work experience in Canada, they can usually apply through the Express Entry program and have sufficient points to be able to get permanent residence, in less than a year after completing school usually. Now, and you can see that in the numbers between 2016 2019 in Canada. Indian students going to Canada increased 182% during the same period. In the United States, in graduate school, in science and engineering programs, Indian students declined 40% in the United States at US universities. One of the more amazing statistics you'll find is that since 2013, the number of Indians immigrating to Canada has tripled, which is really extraordinary. That's a type of situation that's possibly unprecedented in a non-refugee situation, to see that many people see that type of increase of people from one country going to another country. Another related problem in the US when employers are trying to get talent, and it affects universities as well, is the US has maintained a restriction that the Trump administration introduced on Chinese students, that if Chinese graduate students in certain fields went to certain universities, basically any university that got any sort of funding from Chinese military, that individual would get denied a visa. I just had a case recently that I wrote about in my Forbes column. I was contacted by a couple where a student was in the PhD program, had a little more to go in the PhD program, went back to China to visit family, and was denied a visa to get back into the United States. And she's studying autonomous vehicles. And she still is trapped outside the United States, unable to complete her program in the United States. We estimated that for every 1,000 PhDs blocked from coming to the United States, that the U.S. loses about $210 billion in the innovation that patents would have produced, and that's just university-related patents. That's not even counting patents that go out into the broader economy. Well, so what are some of the reforms that would be helpful? I'm sure we'll be talking about more of this later, but I think some of the clear ones that I see at least is, one, to have dual intent for international students to make it less likely they would be denied visas. That means that they would not, that whether or not they intend to stay in the United States after their graduation would not be a factor in deciding whether to grant them a visa. Expand the H-1B exemption for graduate students. Right now, you have a 20,000 exemption if a student attended a U.S. university. That could certainly be expanded to having no limit, actually. And third, eliminate the per country limit and have an exemption for people in masters and PhDs in science and technology fields. In fact, a provision very close to that, almost exactly that, was included in the recent CHIPS Act. It passed the House of Representatives, but it was blocked in conference by Senator Grassley, Republican from Iowa. And while there were other Republicans that favored keeping it in the bill, they did not make their presence known sufficiently to prevent him from blocking the provision. And that was certainly a lost opportunity. Now, to conclude, I just want to talk about some research our organization completed last summer, where we looked at over 600 unicorn companies. These are billion-dollar startup companies that have yet to reach the stock market. And we found that 55% of those companies had at least one immigrant founder. And when we looked also at how many had international students as founders, and found about a quarter of the companies, in other words, over 140 of the companies that are billion-dollar startups had at least one former international student as one of the founders. And I've been doing this research for years, and back in 2016 was the first time we did it. And one of the international students that had founded companies was Noubar Afeyan, who founded Moderna. He had come in as to MIT and received a PhD, and actually created a venture capital type company that does in-house medical research and then later spins those off into companies. And one of them was Moderna, and as we know, created the one of the leading companies for the COVID-19 vaccine. But I also found in the most recent research, someone who came as an international student that had a much different story. Iraj Dabrashani from Iran was the captain on the Iranian national soccer team, and his club soccer team actually had an interesting match where they actually defeated the Shah of Iran's soccer team. And that turned out to not be a good thing to do, because shortly after that, their soccer team was dissolved in retaliation for that. At that point, he decided that he had had enough of what he saw as oppressive activities taking place in Iran, and decided to come to America as an international student. Now, when he was in America, he became a teacher in Baltimore school system, but he also had a son, and that son ended up going on to create a billion-dollar company, Contrast Security. So it really shows that that in America, you really don't know where a story is going to start and end. And in this case, it started with a soccer game and ended with a son that created a billion-dollar company. And the last person I'd like to mention is Lev Yashin, who grew up in the former Soviet Union, and he wanted to be a scientist, but the Soviet Union had collapsed by that point, and Russia's economy was in tatters, and he decided that America was the most immigrant-friendly country, and so he came to America. He entered a PhD program at North Carolina State in materials engineering, and he ended up finding that the niche that he wanted to research was in improving battery storage. And that's turned out to be an extremely important area. And he was able to co-found a company called Scylla that is worth over $3 billion and has over 350 employees. And what they focus on is battery storage for electrical vehicles and other devices. Even their technology is in Mercedes-Benz, new fleet of vehicles. And he has over 200 patents. And what he told me is that he just could not imagine having accomplished this in any other country because of the way the United States has an entrepreneurial system, both at the university level, where they have incubators, but also at the throughout the venture capital system and the way the business system works. So from his view was that America was the only place that he could have been successful. And in fact, in Russia, it's not clear that creating a technology that would eventually end the gas and oil industry would have been a very safe thing to do, in his view. So I think what we see overall is that that while there's always news that sometimes distresses people in America, that we shouldn't lose sight of our greatest story and greatest tradition, which is the ability to be able to attract people from all over the world and to have both those individuals and their children become great contributors and become Americans. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stuart. That was just great for sharing your knowledge and your insights and those interesting stories with us. I'm also glad to say that you're going to be around, you're willing to be around later so that questions can come to you. So that's wonderful. Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Catherine Kish, and I'm the executive director of Einstein's Alley and a member, which is one of the member organizations of the New Jersey Business Immigration Coalition. I'm also a co-founder of the 40-member coalition and very proud of that. It is my privilege to introduce the members of our distinguished panel today. I will also be monitoring the Q&A box. So if you have any questions for the panel members or for Stuart, please put them in the Q&A box and I'll bring them up at the Q&A session later. Let me begin by introducing the two moderators of today's panel of college and university representatives. Elizabeth Gill is the Director of International Employment and Immigration at Montclair State University. Patrick McGovern is a partner at the Genova Burns Law Firm specializing in immigration. He is also a member of the steering committee of the New Jersey Business Immigration Coalition. I'm also very pleased to introduce the four other distinguished members of our panel. Gökhan Alkanat, Associate Provost for the International Education at Rowan University, Amparo Cotting, Professor and International Student Advisor at Bergen Community College, Rick Garfunkel, Vice President, Global Affairs at Rutgers University, and Katsumi Kishida, Associate Director of International Students and Scholars at Kean University. So welcome all of you. Elizabeth will ask the first set of questions.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. We're very happy to have you here. I'm going to ask questions of the four members of our panel and then turn this over to Pat, who is going to ask some more questions of the panel. So let's get started with the first question. So this one's kind of long, so feel free to ask me to repeat myself if you need to. Let's start with Amparo. Could you give us a quick description of the international students at your college or university, including the total number of students, their top countries of origin, what percentage of them are undergraduate or graduate, and what they tend to major in, along with whether your total numbers are growing, staying steady, or declining? Amparo, could you unmute yourself? Okay, I'm going to come back to you, okay? That way you can fix your microphone. Okay, so let's go on to Gökhan. Can you answer that question?
Sure. Gökhan Alkanat, Rowan University. Our international enrollment went from about 130 students to over 800 students since 2018. That's about 35 to 40% increase per year since then, and that trend continues. They're from about 50 different countries, but top countries are India, Bangladesh, China, Nigeria, and Canada. 75% of these students are in our grad programs, and 80% of our international population are in our STEM programs. So thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Katsumi, could you answer the question as well?
Yep, absolutely. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you all. Kean University this semester, approximately, we have 300 international students, of which 50 students or so are on their post-completion OPT status. For the fall, we are expecting an increase. So for the fall 2023 semester, we're probably going to increase to about 400 students enrolled. 80% of our students are undergraduates, 20% graduate. Our number one countries of origin are China, India, and Colombia. We have the location where Kean University is. There's a predominantly Colombian community, so we tend to get a lot of students from Colombia as well. The top two degrees that they're majoring is computer science, as well as our global business degrees.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, okay.
Excellent. Yeah, my name is Amparo Cotting. I'm the international student advisor at Bergen Community College. We're located in Paramus, New Jersey, and we have about 11,000 total students. So we only award associate degrees, so we don't have any graduate students. Our total enrollment this semester is 315 students, and the top 5 countries are Albania, Korea, Turkey, Brazil, Colombia, and moving up, India, Bangladesh, and Jamaica. Our top popular degrees are business administration, computer science. Many of our students are still undecided, so they are in the general studies. graphic design, engineering science, and information technology. So most of our students transfer from Bergen Community College to area universities, Montclair, Keene, William Patterson, NJIT, et cetera. Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Rick, let's go to you.
Sure. Rick Garfunkel from Rutgers. We have about, out of 70,000 students at the university, we have about 8,000 international students right now. We're actually down. I think we had 9,000 in 2019, just pre-pandemic. Half of those are graduate, half undergraduate, maybe about 1,000 on OPT, and 100 are actually non-degree. It's about half male, half female. Top programs of study are, as with some of my colleagues here, computer science, business, engineering, math and statistics, and physical sciences, more on the STEM for the grads than the undergrads, and in growing interest, social sciences, especially for the undergraduate students, psychology in particular. Top sending countries are China and India by far. Actually, India this past year grew relative to China and was larger. I think it's going to switch this coming year. And then South Korea, Taiwan, Turkey are probably 3 through 5. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much. So you can see from the respondents that even though the top sending countries, I think, are still China, India, and South Korea, like Rick was mentioning for Rutgers, there's a good bit of variation from institution to institution based on the community and based on their contacts within various recruitment sources where their students are originating. Okay, so let's go on to question number 2. We heard from Stuart Anderson about some of the benefits that international students bring to the larger community. So could you describe the benefits that they bring to your particular institution? Amparo, I will start with you again this time.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, as you know, the international students pay more tuition, right? So that's one of the main benefits, is that they bring in revenue in as far as tuition goes. But in addition to that, they also contribute to the local communities because they need, we don't offer housing. So the students have to find a place to live. They have to do grocery shopping. They have to use public transportation because many of them do not have cars. So their contributions are large, even though it may not look like it's a large contribution, because they do contribute to the local community. They also contribute internally because, as we all know, our F1 students are only allowed to work on campus. So they are very visible in many of the offices, student life, in the admissions office, in the computer labs, in the mail room. As tutors, many of our international students work in the tutoring center because many of them are excellent in mathematics and especially in the STEM field. So we do have a large population of our F1 students who are able to work on campus, work at the tutoring center. So it gives them visibility, and they're very active also in student life. So at the community college level, maybe their contribution might not be as large as in many other larger institutions, but they do contribute to our local community in many ways.
Still very important. Katsumi, could you answer this question as well?
Sure, absolutely. I'd like to echo everything that Amparo has shared with us today. Obviously, the financial benefit of having an international student paying out of state tuition for a state institution is critical. So Kean University, we have a large population of first-generation college students. So these are American students attending Kean University, as well as dreamers and undocumented students. And what I find is that a lot of our American students haven't had the opportunity to travel outside the state and in addition to travel abroad up until they start their college career with us. And so when our international students encounter our domestic student population, they really provide this world view to our American students, the cultural exchange that happens on campus is vital to the success of our American students as well. I have many students. I also work with bringing our American students abroad in our outbound study abroad office as well. So I do have a lot of students that come to me and say, I've never imagined going abroad or going to study abroad to expand my global views, but I met an international student that's studying with me in my classroom, and we started exchanging ideas and cultural exchanges, and that has encouraged me to then take myself out of New Jersey, out of the United States, and experience another country. So I must say that the cultural exchange that our international students bring to campus allows a lot of global views to organically happen for our domestic students. And that's something that I see that's critical to our campus.
Great. Okay, Gokhan, could you talk about this as well?
Sure. In addition to what my colleagues said, I think for research universities, international presence is very critical. So the international population, for example, on our campus allowed us to expand our graduate programs, especially in STEM fields. So that helped us, that's helping us to become a R1 institution. Right now, Rowan is an R2 institution. And similar to what Amparo said, as you know, the population cliff is around the corner. About a year or so, it's going to affect most US, well, I think all US universities, higher education. So I think having this additional international enrollment from a market outside of US is going to help us compensate that fluctuation in domestic enrollment in the following years.
Excellent. So Rick, I turn it over to you.
Sure. Again, hate to be repetitive. So economic advantages, both on and off campus. On campus, they contribute significantly, the international students, to our teaching and research enterprise, especially in STEM fields. As my colleagues mentioned, they're cultural ambassadors on campus. They add significantly to diversity on campus, global diversity, not just domestic diversity. And they add in multiple ways, language, culture. We have a nice event with the African Students Association tonight, actually faculty, Center for African Studies. International students are, pursuing STEM fields for the most part, especially at the graduate level, and they are critical, as has been mentioned by all speakers and Stuart at the beginning, for national leadership in technology. So that's probably the biggest long-term benefit and kind of why we're meeting here today. You can read it in all of the reports. It's in CHIPS Acts. It's in all of the NSF documentation about the importance of that. So just repetitive a little bit to what's already been said.
That's okay. I think every single person has added their own flavor to this.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's really interesting about international students coming is that they don't necessarily, in a lot of cases, don't necessarily see themselves as adding a cultural element. They've just come to study, right? They might not even be interested in cultural exchange. So just like with the students Katsumi was talking about, that came to her and said, my eyes were open, my world was opened up by the international students. The same thing can happen for them by having the opportunity or even the necessity of meeting students from all of these different countries. And suddenly they say, hey, there's this whole world out there. There's not just American culture, there are all these other cultures as well. Okay, so for the third question is recruiting students from around the world is a bit of a challenge, as many of us are aware. I wonder if you could share with the audience how you're currently doing this, as well as any thoughts you might have about how the US government could better facilitate the entire recruitment process. And let me start with Gokhan on this one.
Sure, thank you. Of course, we are not able to, we don't have the resources to reach out to every single country in the world. So we identify some strategic markets for us, for our programs that we have on campus, and we use multiple channels. And some examples of that is we work with foreign governments and US Commercial Service, Education USA, recruitment fairs, recruitment agencies, and I think most important one is the word of mouth. And we have international partnership with universities in foreign countries. I think in building this, the most critical thing is to build a strategic network and being able to be committed to building mutual understanding and, most importantly, trust with your global partners. That matters a lot because short-term strategies usually fail very soon, very quickly. So it's important to build that trust and mutual understanding with your partners overseas. It could be a government entity or it could be a partner university overseas. And I think U.S. embassies and consulates, and I see that more happening these days, actually, that they can do more outreach activities in the country they're located. One thing, I don't want this to sound like a complaint, but I think if U.S. government can prevent drastic fluctuation in visa approval rejection rate, that's going to help universities and our partners also plan ahead. So I think that would be very helpful.
Excellent. Rick, could you talk a bit about Rutgers recruitment strategies?
So we have, we're big. So we have actually 6 people now. We've just grown from about 3 to 6 that do undergraduate international recruiting in our central enrollment management office for the New Brunswick campus. Separate people on the Camden and Newark campuses are doing that. And sometimes my office, which is actually a global office above all, are helping them. We're particularly helping them, for example, in China and India. We've traveled. I myself have been to China and India, several times, and I'm going again shortly to help with the enrollment management teams. In the graduate level, it's often done at the department level, but we're trying to have a kind of a university-wide graduate recruiting. I come from chemistry and physics, and I used to do the graduate recruiting myself in the usual places, India, China, and a few other places in the world, Europe, to do the graduate recruiting in the STEM fields. So yes, all of us are involved. In the global office at a big school like Rutgers, there's a sort of a separation of duties, and that's mostly done out of the enrollment management office, is not the global office, which is dealing with other things, as Katsumi mentioned, students in, students out, but not the recruiting part of the students in.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you. Amparo?
Well, we, as a community college, I think word of mouth works a lot better for us. Friends that tell a friend, a family tells a family member, a cousin, and then they'll show up. We do have a platform. I think Study in New Jersey is one of the ones that we use, but we don't do recruiting overseas. There's no money for that. So basically, plus the fact that we don't have housing, it's very difficult to recruit students, to attract them to a community college, when most of the students that want to come to the United States want to go to Ivy League or four-year institutions. But they have learned that the community college is a wonderful option for them because they do save a ton of money when they complete 60 credits at Bergen Community College and then transfer to any of the state universities. So most of what we do here is word of mouth. Occasionally we have used virtual fairs, but that doesn't seem to work too well for us. So
well, this seems to be working great for you, Amparo, at Bergen. Yep. So that's good news. So we are now going to turn over this panel of questions to Pat McGovern from Genova Burns, and he's going to ask a few more. So I'm going to mute.
Good morning, panelists, and I hope everybody can hear me. Yes, okay, very good. So this next question deals with return on investment and loss of American investment in educating the international students. And so my question to the panelists is, can you share with us any anecdotal or statistical information you have regarding the post-graduation job or job hunting experiences, positive and negative, of the international students, especially those seeking to work in the United States? And if we could start with Gökhan.
I can't say we have anything negative we have observed so far. The vast majority of our graduating students, they find a job before they graduate and they work using their optional practical training permit, OPT. those with additional STEM work permit, which is additional 2 years, they have been, our observation that they have been more successful in securing an H-1B work visa or employment-based green card, because naturally they have 3 years in total to be able to secure one of these, versus a student from maybe liberal arts or business will only have 1 year to be able to switch to a work visa or a green card option.
Okay, and Katsumi, and any comments on this one?
Sure, absolutely. So I would like to share my personal experience. I came to the United States 20 years ago as an F1 student. I did my graduate degree at Columbia University, and I went through the whole process of being an F1 student, applying for a post-completion OPT, trying to find an H-1B sponsorship, and then eventually applying for a permanent residency green card. It's been a long journey. I must say, as an international student, it's a constant uphill battle. The job market is competitive, and although our international students are excelling tremendously in the STEM field, if you are trying to find an employer that may not be familiar with the H-1B process or may not have experience hiring an international student that needs sponsorship in the future, I have experienced many job interviews where they would come back and say, your qualifications meet what we're looking for. However, we just don't have the resources to do an H-1B sponsorship for you. Therefore, we decided to go with another candidate who was American that didn't need to go through this process. So the job market is competitive as an international student. In addition to a competitive job market, you have to be really savvy in understanding your status and how to navigate negotiating with an employer that it is not an impossible task to sponsor you as an international student for work. I do think that it is critical for institutions like ourselves to really partner with our career services on campus to prepare our international students from the beginning as they start their journey here, to provide them tools, whether that's having them do multiple internships or their resume is built out, but also teaching them skills of like negotiation, helping them understand how they navigate conversations around sponsorship, I think is going to be a critical to making sure that our talented international students are able to navigate this uphill battle that they're going to continue.
Follow-up question. It was a long and winding road for you. So from end of F status until successful H1 status, give us an estimate as to how much time that took.
OPT was 1 year for me, and H1B was 6 years. And then the permanent residency took additional 2 years for that. So over 10 years of a long winding road. And
were you able to stay in the United States that entire time?
Yes, I was. And I was really fortunate to find support at key times. My first H-1B sponsorship was a small private ESL institution, but the owner of the school happened to be a lawyer who understood the legalities of an H-1B sponsorship. So it was just kind of like a miraculous coincidence. So I was able to do an H-1B, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Let me turn it over to Rick. Rick, any anecdotal or statistical information that you can share on postgraduate jobs or job hunting?
Yeah, so I'm in the nanotech field personally, so my students don't have a problem. The domestic ones get the job earlier. Let's say graduate students, they get it like immediately. I have companies just dying to hire them, both in the, let's say, biological biomed fields and more in my field, in the tech field. They're hired away by California, by Oregon to Intel, IBM. They used to be hired to those areas. Now a lot of them go into the energy space. So both domestic and international have no problem getting the job. The international ones don't always go to the highest tech places, so they don't go to Portland if it's Intel, but they get sent to somewhere else, the second level place. That's a kind of an interesting thing that we see for some of the locations of the top tech schools. In general, we do not see a problem between the American and the international students in the tech field. All of the Americans are getting, plenty of jobs, and the companies are trying to hire them because it's easier for them. It's easier and quicker for them. We have my students, the ones that come in, sort of to Katsumi's point, they do need a little bit of training. They've back in the home country, for many of them, they made it to Rutgers or made it to any school in the US based on rote memorization. So teaching them how to study in the US with flipped classroom and different sorts of pedagogy requires a rethinking and a sort of a reprogramming of their minds. So we have a class called Are You Fit at Rutgers, where we teach the kids when they come in, and it's mostly just meant for first year undergraduate international students, but now we're also doing some of those classes for graduate students to let them think creatively and think in teams, which is not how it's done before they come here for the most part. So there's a little bit of prep here that actually the American kids help them. There's a lot of peer mentoring between the American and international students, and that helps make them work together. There's no sort of hard feelings between the two. They become best friends quite quickly, both at the graduate and undergraduate level for the most part that we see. So no, I guess back to the original question, we don't see any loss or any hurt for the American students by having the international students come here.
Very good. Let me turn to Amparo. Amparo, any comments or inputs on this question?
Sure. Well, I also came as an F1 student, but I got married, so that was quick.
Congratulations.
Well, that was 40 years ago. Since we have the associate degree, many of our students take advantage of the career practical training, which gives them a little bit of time to get their feet wet. And many of them continue with the optional practical training for 1 year before they transfer to the 4-year schools. We don't have a lot of students do that. Many of them opt to transfer right away to the 4-year institutions. But we do have, this semester, we have about 10 students applying for the practical training. And of course, many of them are not going to be able to get any farther with their immigration process unless they continue with the F1 at the 4-year school. So the nursing students, however, are having a better luck because nursing companies are hiring them and processing their permanent residency because of the lack of nurses. So many of our nursing students are going that route. Before they go for their bachelor's degree, many of them opt to get their permanent residency through the agency that hires them.
Very good. Let me turn to the next question. Our keynote speaker today touched on the pathways available to students when their student status expires. And the pathways are somewhat limited and are generally short-term, assuming the student does not find a sponsor for an H visa. So what are some specific reforms to our immigration system that, in your opinion, would enable more international students to remain in the United States and allow our country to remain competitive in the global race for talent? And I started with Gokhan last time. Let me start with Katsumi this time, if I may.
Sure, absolutely. I think a lot of the tips and advice has already been shared, but obviously the increase of numbers of H-1B sponsorships that are issued per year will greatly contribute to that, as well as making maybe a direct pathway for highly skilled workers to directly apply for the green card or the permanent residency, bypassing the H-1B step, I think will also be a great tool or an idea for us to pursue. So those are some of the ideas that come to my mind.
Okay, let me turn to Rick again. Rick, Any ideas on this? Any specific reforms that come to your mind? I listened very closely, and it sounds like at Rutgers you've had a lot of success. Very good, but nonetheless, are there any specific reforms that would enhance the chances and prospects of the international students in remaining in the U.S. and working, those who would like to do that?
Yeah, again, most of these things have been mentioned. Addressing visa delays and denials, that's often happening later. Most of the F1s get in. Less than 1% are blocked, at least at our place. Upping the CPT regulations in addition to the OPT regulations, that helps. Maybe allowing spouses to work, that would help for those that are married. Expansion of OPT to non-STEM fields, and clarifying what's allowed to be done online, especially as online grows, students going back and forth. I think, but the biggest thing is really the fear of what's coming down the line. So knowing the OPT regulations and numbers and limitations and time before you can get go for the green card, those are actually the scariest things that send people to England, Canada, Australia, wherever else they're going. So those numbers which we're mentioning, both for H and later permanent resident, understanding what's coming down the line and not having, as Gokhan mentioned, changes which might be coming again soon with changes in Washington. That's a kind of the scariest thing and scares people away. Is Trump in or not in? And who's in, and are the walls being put up back again or not? So I think that's the scariest thing, even more than some of the minor fraction of visa delays and etc.
Very good. Amparo, what are your thoughts on specific reforms that would enhance the prospects of the international students and staying in the United States to work?
Well, for us as a community college, I think many of the issues that we have, that sometimes students get a 1-year visa, that's it. Some countries are just issuing a 1-year visa for a 2-year program. So they're either forced to go back home, or many of them are forced to stay here for years and years and years, continuing their education. Sometimes we benefit from that because some students who are PhD who have done OPT apply to Burton Community College to get another degree, an associate's degree, because they want to remain here. And the only way for them to remain is to continue studying, because their path for an H-1B was denied, or because that's the only thing they can do. So I think at the community college level, I don't know, I don't think I can offer a lot of suggestions, because our students continue their academic path through the 4-year institutions. They go to Rutgers, Keene, Montclair. So it's maybe facilitate the visa process, and especially when the visa is issued for just 1 year, it's not conducive to making the student feel comfortable about going back home, because they're afraid that they might not be able to renew their visa. So they stay here in limbo for many, many, many years.
Yeah. Let me tap into Elizabeth. Elizabeth, I'm sure you have some specific reforms that come to your mind that you could share with us. What are any specific reforms that haven't been mentioned yet that you think would be practical enhancements to the prospects of the international student?
Yeah, I think we kind of touched on this, but absent the government choosing to raise the H-1B numbers, one of the things that would really help would be filling in the gap between the end of the F1 program and the beginning of the H-1B. And the reason that's such an issue is that for most students, the target employer, the person that they're trying to go get a job with, is going to be subject to what is called the cap, which is that cap on the number of H-1Bs that are available each year. There's one cap for general H-1B numbers, and then there's another one for like highly skilled workers with graduate degrees. So if that cap isn't raised or eliminated altogether, then there's only one time each year that a student can go apply through an employer, and that's in the spring around April 1st. So if they are not selected, because as Stuart was pointing out, there's a huge number of people who are rejected each year. If they're not selected, then they're going to have to wait another year to try again, unless they happen to get lucky enough to find a job at a nonprofit or higher ed. So if all students had a longer period of OPT available to them, again, OPT is optional practical training. Right now it's 12 months for all students to begin with, and then STEM students can apply for an extra 2 years. If all students had a longer period of OPT available to them, then they would have more chances to get into that H-1B lottery. The other thing that's really prohibitive at times is that when STEM students are going to apply for that second period of OPT, they may or may not be able to get it because there are many more hoops they have to jump through. The company that they're going to apply to has to be willing to be registered in the government's E-Verify system and use it for all their employees. So some employers say, no, I don't want to do that. And then in addition to that, the hiring employer has to fill out a lot of documentation showing how they're going to kind of mentor and train the student and guide them through this whole period of OPT and continue to do so. It's not a one-time thing. They're going to have to come back and do it again. And so some employers also say, I don't want to go to all of that trouble just for this one employee. So those two main reforms to OPT, making a longer period of time available to all students and not having this prohibitive process for any extension of OPT. And honestly, I think all students should be able to apply for an extension, not just STEM students, but those would both be very helpful to the problems that we're seeing right now.
Okay, let me turn to Gökhan, who is sitting patiently and I'm sure is feverishly wanting to provide his inputs on specific reforms that come to mind that would enhance international students' job prospects.
I think my colleagues mentioned a lot of things I also agree on, but there are a couple of things. I think one of the major things is that F1 visa, I think my colleagues would all agree that is the most scrutinized visa type. Yeah, you can come to the United States on a B tourist visa, stay here for 6 months. No one knows what you're doing. And you can get another extension of 6 months as a tourist. Now you're here for a year. No one knows what you're doing. They don't even probably know your address. And then you can go to Canada for a day, come back next day and stay another 6 months. So, and you can do this for 10 years because that's what the visa is for, right? 10 years. But yet we have a Chinese student with a 4-year degree they're getting into, get a 1-year visa for a 4-year degree, right? Other than that, I think that has been a bit unfair to international students, and a student who has done their F1 visa and then OPT and STEM OPT, then H1 and green card. I think when you put all that paperwork together, that's equivalent to a couple of books, a couple of boxes of probably paper. So I think making that this OPT and STEM OPT less complicated paperwork, that would encourage employers, potential employers, to hire our international students. And as Eric mentioned, maintaining a welcoming image of the United States matters. I had situations where the student is accepted to a degree program, chose not to come because the student and the family were scared. This is not now, but a couple of years ago, because the family was scared that once the student make it to the United States, the student would be targeted because they are foreigners, right? Keeping the government fees, the petition fees, I think reasonable is important, because last couple of years we just seeing this increase over and over and over, like 20%, 30% above inflation rate, definitely. So those are a couple of things I want to mention. I think that would help the universities plan better for internationalization.
Very good. That's the end of the prepared questions. If there are any additional comments on any of the questions that any of our panelists would like to share that they didn't have an opportunity to before we close out and turn it back to our moderator, this would be a good time. If not,
one additional comment is I think the advocacy should be, there's a red state, blue state issue. So not just in Washington, but at the state level. And if you can get the states to buy in, governors and state senators, they can also put pressure on their state senators and Congress people. So oftentimes, there's political pressure, party-based political pressure and other political pressure to put up walls in Washington or regrow them or whatever it is, flip back and forth as Gokhan was sort of mentioning earlier. Some of the pressure can be done at the state level, so we shouldn't just be advocating there. We don't really have a big problem in Trenton right now, but some of the other states do. So just saying that we should be partnering with other states in this initiative at the state level, not just at the Washington level.
Good.
Right.
Okay.
Well, very good. Well, thank you, panelists, and we'll turn it back to Catherine at this point.
All right. Well, thank you so much for such an interesting discussion. It was just terrific. And, as you're saying, Rick, it really puts us into the mode of what the coalition is trying to do. And thank you. I'm sorry. I forgot my face. But I really think that you're onto something there that the coalition will pick up on, and we've started working with the state and also with our congressional representatives. So now it's time for you to answer a few questions coming from the audience. And Stuart, are you still with us because you've got a question? Great. Okay.
Yes.
Here's your question from Natalia Menger. Mr. Anderson, from your experience working in immigration in the United States, what are your thoughts on the nature of U.S. immigration policy? How can it be made friendlier and easier to adjust one's status to a long-term status from F1 to H1 and legal permanent residence? We are losing too many to Canada.
Well, it's a great question, and I think the last panel, touched on some of that. I think what you really need is, you need more support, and that takes everyone trying to convince, public opinion and also particular legislators to have a more welcoming attitude. As I pointed out earlier, that while it's easy to be pessimistic, on the other hand, the provision to allow exemption from green card caps for masters and PhDs in STEM fields had passed the House of Representatives. And possibly if there was a different ranking member on Judiciary Committee, such as Senator Graham, who's now the ranking member versus Senator Grassley last time, you might have seen that provision become law. So it's easy to be pessimistic about this, but on the other hand, if you look at it in a bigger picture, that there is recognition. There just isn't sufficient recognition. And I think that continuing to push the current administration to have more friendly policies, which they have to a large degree, but there are other things that they could do. For example, we put out a paper recently by an economist that showed that there's really no reason you shouldn't allow all spouses of H-1B visa holders to be able to work, not just spouses where the principal H-1B visa holder has applied and is waiting for a green card.
All right. Well, thank you. Here's another question for any of the panelists from Oya Turkle. How do we handle large number of students entering the U.S. with our I-20, but transfer to other schools before they even step onto our campuses? This impacts our course offerings, revenue forecasts, etc. Anyone want to take that?
I will be happy to.
Okay, Gokhan, please.
About it. One of the things we have done is to be able to filter students and understand which student is more serious about studying in the United States. Some of them may not be as serious. So we implemented a deposit program where they have to do an enrollment deposit once they're admitted. That helped a lot in terms of identifying who is really interested in enrolling in university or who wants to use as a stepping stone. Because we're a public university, it's easier, probably they think, to get a visa for a public university. The other thing is that regardless of what you do, international student enrollment has too many steps. The admission, the I-20, the visa process, applying for a visa, the flight, are they going to find the flight, etc. When they show up, are they going to really show up on your campus? So there's so many filters in that funnel that for your university, you'll probably look at the statistics and figure out some sort of a ratio. You know, these many I-20s are issued last 10 years. This is how many of them showed up. My 15 to 20 years of international education experience tells me that just look at your I-20s. If you're lucky, you will get 1/3 of them show up. If it's not that kind of semester, you may get probably quarter. This is an average, of course, and it may not apply to every university, but that's kind of how we look at it. A quarter to a third of those students will come and enroll in your programs.
Okay, well, thank you. Here's another question. If international students remain in the United States, does their decision to stay in America harm the economies of their home countries? Who would like to try that?
Well, I could take a crack at that. We've actually seen the opposite. There's been research that shows that that having any immigrants from a particular country come to the United States ends up creating a vast network of trade ties, and trade is almost always mutually beneficial, and that improves the local economies. I think if you look at the case of nurses in the Philippines, you wouldn't have had nurses in the Philippines even become nurses if there wasn't an opportunity to work in other countries. You've seen many successful Indian entrepreneurs who came to America first as international students and later engage in not only trade investment back in India, but also an enormous number of philanthropic activities as well. So I think that having someone come as an international student, whichever direction they end up going in, ends up creating ties between the countries, and those ties are almost always mutually beneficial.
Thank you. Okay. Here's our last question. Should PhD recipients in STEM fields be granted a direct path to permanent residence? What do you think about that question? Anybody want to take that? PhDs, should they, in STEM fields, should they get a direct path? Gokhan, again?
I'd like to say that, you know, we have the lottery, green card lottery, and as far as I know, that all the U.S. government requires for that lottery is your picture, your first name, last name, and your date of birth. And if you're selected, regardless of your background, what you could bring to U.S. in terms of your skills, knowledge, etc., potential contributions, you get the green card. I think looking at other countries like Canada, they have more calculated citizenship path where you get points for certain skills, certain knowledge, certain education level, etc. I think if you're just looking at it from the economy perspective and being competitive, I think allowing the students with master's or PhD diploma will only benefit us because they're already educated, their investment is already done, and we will probably lose them to another country after that. So I'm definitely in favor of this.
Okay, good point. Rick, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, in my personal feeling is yes, it would be great. Do I think it's going to happen in Washington right now in the current political climate? No, this is probably more a question for Stuart. So kind of we need his advice on where we should, what is possible in Washington now. We're happy to push on all of the areas, but what is feasible in the current political climate and the coming political climate? And how can we, best put our resources? We have, two lobbyists for us, or we don't call them lobbyists, but whatever their names are in Washington, who are helping us on this front. And we just need advice on what's doable. There's, a bunch of acts that are put forth. Sometimes they come pretty close, and sometimes they get killed by somebody, Grassley, or whoever it is. And so we need the advice of the pros in Washington, and how close are we on the certain acts?
Well, I mean, I could just add to that at this point, I think we'd probably be looking at pushing the administration to do administrative changes, working with a group like Miriam's they focus very closely on international student issues and how to benefit in terms of particularly their transition to employment. And I think that's one of the things I think we've seen with universities from both when I worked in Congress and also up to today, that we've seen a much greater recognition from universities that of how important it is for the students to be able to stay here and work after they complete their studies.
Oh, that's great. Okay. I think sadly we've reached our time limit for questions, but thank you again, all of you wonderful panel members, and Stuart, we really appreciate you taking time to be with us today. And we really find your remarks so helpful as we think about formulating policy as a coalition. And we work through, as Rick suggested, both the states and push a little bit on our federal government to get these reforms through. Thank you all so much. Now I have the great pleasure of introducing Miriam Feldblum, excuse me. Miriam, she is a co-founder and executive director of the nonpartisan, nonprofit President's Alliance on Higher Education and Immigration. The Alliance consists of over 550 colleges and university leaders enrolling over 5 million students in 43 states, DC and Puerto Rico. She's a national expert on the intersection of immigration and higher education. She's written extensively and delivered presentations on numerous immigration-related topics, and of course, international students. Miriam is also a non-resident fellow at the Migration Policy Institute. She has served as Vice President for Student Affairs at Pomona College and Senior Director at the California Institute of Technology. Miriam has her undergraduate degree from Barnard and master's and doctorates in political science from Yale. Miriam, take it away.
Thank you so much, Catherine, and thank you to Nick and to Kyle and the New Jersey Business Immigration Coalition for putting this together. Thanks to Stuart for your great remarks, and to the great panel, Elizabeth, Gökhan, Amparo, Katsumi, Rick, and Pat, for your energizing and informative conversation. Today's conversations resonate strongly with the work we're doing at the President's Alliance, as Stuart alluded to. And for those of you who may not know us, let me also just add to what Catherine shared, that we work to advance forward-looking immigration policy at the federal level to support international, undocumented, and refugee students and other campus members. We support positive change at the state level, including tuition equity and licensure eligibility policies and practices. And we work to equip leaders and their institutions with effective practices to support these students on campus and beyond graduation. So I want to try to pull out some of the themes from today's conversations, but first let me also take a step back to lay some context about how immigration is shaping higher ed and how higher ed is a pathway to immigration, building on what we've heard. And let me start with 2 data points, which I think really loop back to Stuart's examples and the panelists themselves. So the first data point, 31%. In 2000, first and second generation immigrants made up 20% of all students in higher education. In 2018, that number had risen to 28%. And now I can share that according to census data from 2021, that number has risen to 31%. So from 20% to 31% in a little over 20 years, the proportion of immigrant origin students in higher ed. Now, this data point is part of the data update on the number of immigrant origin students in higher ed that the President's Alliance collaborates on with the Migration Policy Institute. We'll be releasing more, the entire data set along with the commentary. So this is a preview, and I'll share with Nick and Catherine some links that you can find after this talk. It'll be up on our higher ed immigration portal, and it's by state. Indeed, in New Jersey, immigrant origin students in higher ed are not 31% of all students enrolled, but 44% of all students enrolled, and kind of resonates also what we were hearing from Katsumi and others. And this does not include international students, which account for another 3% or so in New Jersey. Now, immigrant origin students have been fueling the domestic enrollment growth at colleges and universities over the last 20 years. 1.9 million are first-generation immigrants, that is, students who are foreign-born without U.S. citizenship at birth, and 3.7 million are second-generation immigrants, namely born in the U.S. to one or more immigrant parents, including international student alumni who, were able to overcome the hurdles and stay in the U.S. By the way, a higher rate of first-generation immigrant students pursue advanced degrees than second or third-generation Americans. Now, here's a second data point, 20%. We've been examining immigration impacts, not only in terms of students, but also what's the impact of foreign-born leaders, administrators, and faculty on campus. Harvard University President Larry Bacow recently shared that a third of Harvard faculty are foreign-born. My colleague Rajika Bandari wrote a great post on our higher ed immigration portal on the question of the impact of foreign-born campus leaders several months ago, but noted that there's no baseline or good data about the number. In launching our efforts, it seemed obvious to us that we should start by looking at our own membership. And I'm happy to share that our early mapping reveals that to date, a total of 117 of the 550 plus President's Alliance members, future, current, and former presidents and chancellors, have been foreign-born, or around 20%. Now, this includes those who first arrived in the U.S. as international students, who subsequently became immigrants, as well as those who arrived as first-generation immigrants when they were young with their family or through other paths. What today's conversation has made clear, and it's bolstered by the research referenced by Stuart and others, is that enabling and supporting predictable pathways to employment for international students and providing opportunities for these individuals to stay and launch careers, lives, and families is in our national interest. It strengthens our national defense, fuels our economy, spurs innovation, enhances our communities, helps drive our future demographic growth, and indeed helps define our national identity. But I think we're still working on the what next, why it matters, who more we should engage, and all these questions that are not clear. And that's why today's conversation is so valuable. It leads us to ask, how are we in higher education partnering with those in the New Jersey Business Immigration Coalition, with government, with advocates, and others to advance forward-looking policy actions? Can we more intentionally and strategically embrace our role as an immigration pathway and help accelerate immigrant inclusion? What does that look like on the ground? Well, to build on today's conversation, I think we need to recognize and explore the important role that higher education institutions already play as a pathway to immigration, especially as we're talking today about international students, but also other immigrant students. And I think Amparo's and others, examples really point to that. And I call on us to identify at least 3 actionable steps that higher ed leaders and campuses can take in partnership with others to further advance, facilitate, and accelerate immigration pathways for our students and community members. These may be legislative, though that's a big hill right now, administrative, and as Stuart said, that's where we and others are also pressing in terms of our advocacy, though we're also continuing on the congressional front, or actions at the state or campus level. And I heard some great ideas today. Think about Katsumi's personal compelling story. One forward idea for New Jersey, maybe the New Jersey Coalition in coordination with the campuses here and with the state, could pilot and lead in providing legal services, not just for immigrant students in terms of undocumented students, humanitarian parolees, refugees, but also international students and alumni to help them navigate those immigration pathways. What Katsumi said was such a hard hill to climb. Rick's idea about partnering with other states is also something that we personally at the President Alliance think it's a great idea. You may have seen a op-ed that the governors of Utah and Indiana wrote together, really talking about the need for immigration and to work on immigration with their states. And those are 2 Republican governors. The President's Alliance held an event in Boston a few weeks ago entitled higher ed pathways to immigration with the Edward M. Kennedy Institute, UMass Boston, and the Harvard Immigration Initiative. And that was an idea that speakers there also advocated for. And whether it's legal services or partnering with states, the President's Alliance would be happy to explore with you these ideas. Otherwise, fundamentally, the conversations speak to the need to establish a coordinated U.S. strategy to recruit, support, and retain international students and scholars. And while the administration has made some positive progress on supporting international students, such as improving visa processing, though I think that the issues raised with the one-year visas or with Chinese students is really important, there are still many hurdles, and we need Congress to act. As Stuart and others have mentioned, a few key policy changes would be, one, allow for dual intent. It's really hard when international students cannot even express their intent, their desire to stay after graduation in a long-term fashion. They have to say, I'm planning to leave after the academic program. Second would be increase the number of green cards, as we heard. Third, include a smoother pathway for international student alumni of U.S. institutions, including increasing the number of H-1Bs or direct paths to permanent residence for advanced degree holders. Any combination of those changes would make a world of difference to students, to higher ed, to business, to communities. And of course, in terms of administrative actions, as the panelists highlighted, continue to improve visa processing, issue clarified and expanded guidance on the use of curricular practical training. So to give international students valuable hands-on experience essential to their career development, but possibly outside their degree requirements and don't require them to use their OPT. For OPT, as was mentioned, extend 2-year OPT across fields, not just STEM, extend OPT. Articulate goals for the inclusion of a broad diversity of international students in our classrooms. It was great to hear at the beginning of the panel, the diversity of countries where students are coming from, but there still needs to be some more support for increasing the student recruitment from the Global South. And I should mention also, and to stay tuned, for a new Welcome Corps inclusion of college and university sponsorship of refugee students. In January, the administration announced the launch of Welcome Corps, which is the single boldest, most innovative initiative to support refugee admissions in the US. And next month, I anticipate an announcement specifically on college and university opportunities to sponsor refugee students. So in closing, today has shown why advancing policy change is a win-win. It's good for international students to have predictability and stability, and it's good for employers and communities who want to retain them, address talent and labor shortages. Importantly, this is not about domestic or international talent. It's a yes and. We need to support and accelerate domestic talent, all domestic students, including our domestic immigrant students, underrepresented students, all, and attract international students. It's a win-win for individual students, local economies and communities, and our national economy and prosperity. And finally, today's remarks also make clear that staying with the status quo should be seen as a no-go, because it means we will move further behind the curves of other countries like Canada, and the hurdles just increase, as Stuart and others have so eloquently described. Thank you, and I look forward to engaging with all of you in the future.
Thank you so much, Miriam. Nick?
Miriam, thank you so much for your inspiring remarks, your insights, your experience, and pointing us, I think, in the right direction in terms of our future advocacy on this issue. It's great to know that you are providing national leadership in this area, and we look forward to working together with you in the future. Hi, everyone. My name is Nick Montalto, and I'm currently serving as coordinator for the New Jersey Business Immigration Coalition. We're the partner organization with NJBIA in developing the Garden State Immigration Policy Institute. Not only do I want to thank Miriam, but also all members of our distinguished panel, our great keynote speakers, Stuart Anderson, Kyle Sullender from NJBIA, and our moderators, Elizabeth Gill, Catherine Kish, and Pat McGovern, for their help in putting together today's program. Also, a special shout out to our two sponsors, CGI and the law firm of Genova Burns. Without them, today's event would not be possible. I do hope that you have emerged today with a better understanding of this issue, which is of great importance, not only to the higher education community, but I think to all Americans concerned about continued creativity and growth of the American economy. We hope that you will join us for future events of the Institute. I'd also like to mention that Coalition welcomes new members to join our ranks. There's no fee for membership, only a commitment on your part to what we call evidence-based and bipartisan immigration reform. If you want more information about the Coalition, go to our website, njbusinessimmigration.org. Thank you again for joining us today, and we hope to see you again at future events. And I hope today's event was informative and inspiring, as it has been, I think, for me and for most of us. Thank you all.